Hi everybody, and welcome to the Atheist Experience. The weather outside is frightful for Austin. It's like 55 degrees outside. It's terrible.
Yeah. It's not that frightful.
I'm your host, Russell Glasser. With me today is Martin Wagner.
Hello.
Neither of us really wants to be here all that much today. I'm just going to get that out right up front.
I didn't not want to be here, but I just say, I have some plans. I'm going to be visiting the family and all that kind of stuff. And I was a little worried about my ability to do everything and do the show, but it's going to work out.
Good. I'm so glad to have you here.
I'm very happy to be doing the final show of 2014, as a matter of fact.
That's right.
Yes.
And the last show before Christmas, about which I don't feel like saying anything this year.
No. And no show next Sunday, as it is the 5th Sunday of the month.
That is correct.
So this is it for us, for the year. Yes.
So today is December 21st, 2014. We're a live call-in public access atheist television show based in Austin, Texas, dedicated to promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. Excuse me for talking around this cough drop. We're available through live streaming video at ustream.tv. The official Atheist Experience website is www.atheist-experience.com. You can provide feedback by commenting on the official show blog at freethoughtblogs.com/AXP, or you can also email us at tv@atheist-community.org. If you enjoy this show, check out our related podcast, The Nonprofits, airing on the first and third Wednesdays of the month. You can find links at the Atheist Experience website, and the next Nonprofits will be recorded on January 7th, 2015. As always, the cast and crew of the Atheist Experience will be going to dinner after the show at 1624 West 5th Street. We'll be arriving around 6 p.m. I mentioned that I was going to give a talk at St. Charles Community College, and that did indeed happen a few weeks ago. I had a wonderful time, and more importantly, the video is up on YouTube.
Right on.
So, I haven't posted a link to that on the Atheist Experience blog, but I will pronto after this. But it's on.
When we do like the open thread for this episode, you can just add that link there. Or embed it there, or whatever.
Right, sure. It's on my YouTube channel if I don't remember to put it up. But anyway, let's see. Ongoing announcements. The Texas Secular Convention is happening here in Austin, February 27th through March 1st. There's going to be a rally at the Capitol first. The convention will be at the Sheraton near the Capitol. Speakers include Greta Christina, Annie Laurie Gaylor, Barry Lynn, Jamila Bay, MC David Smalley. That's not a title. That's what he's going to be doing in the conference.
Okay.
Let's see. And there's no show next week, like you said.
Correct.
That's it for the announcements.
And there may be more guests with the conference.
Yeah.
Later, so we don't know yet. But that's
come
I guess
on
tentatively,
down.
Tentatively, that's who we know is going to be there. So.
All right, you don't have a topic. I don't have a topic.
During the pre-show, we were like talking to some people in the audience about video games. I'd be perfectly happy to do a whole show.
How about
talking
the Game of Thrones game, huh?
Yeah, whole show talking about that.
Man, that ending.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll spend the whole show making fun of Ubisoft.
Okay. Mike in Redondo Beach, California.
How you guys doing today? Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, we're all right.
Pretty good. Well, I've been better, but good enough.
Well, all right, man. I hope you get better quick. So basically, recently I've been on this kind of tangent with the debate between Matt and Cy. And, it's kind of frustrating listening to somebody like Cy speak. However, I just wanted to know your guys' perspective from the question, do you use your reason to justify your reason? Not that it proves or disproves anything, but just to hear your perspective in regards to actually if you think that's true or false and what that entirely means to the theist's argument.
Well, I think it's all just rhetorical smoke, for one thing. Presuppositional apologetics, like logical proofs, these are all approaches to apologetics. These are all arguments that have been constructed in the interest of attempting to convert atheists, basically.
Right.
There is...
I've never heard of that working, by the way.
Well, yeah, true.
I mean, I'm not even all that convinced that it's trying to convert atheists. I think from my perspective, the purpose of presuppositional apologetics is to throw so much pseudo-intellectual bullshit into the air that people who might have been questioning their faith will say, oh, listen, that guy sounds really smart, and this other guy doesn't really know what to say.
Yeah, it's the old if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with BS approach. And on the one hand, you can kind of look at these approaches that apologists take and say, okay, this shows that we as maybe movement atheism or the increasing prominence of atheism has had at least an impact, because they're at least acknowledging, all right, we can't just give them the old sales pitch. We can't just say it's all about faith. We have to at least make a stab at defending and arguing for these beliefs intellectually, rationally, what have you. So in that regard, you can say, all right, you get a cookie for the effort. But I don't know any actual Christians, and I'm talking about Sunday go-to-meeting, in the pews, Bible-believing Christians who were ever converted to the faith by one of these arguments. I've never met one. I've never met a person who was a flat-out atheist, or even just someone who's indifferent to religion, and then one day they heard the Callum cosmological argument, or they heard a presuppositionalist approach, and had this eureka moment, and they were like, well, indeed, God exists, and from then on they were in the pews every Sunday. I don't know of any actual examples of that. So when someone tries to come at me with one of these arguments, I usually just go, hang on. Why don't you tell me what you believe and why you believe it? What was it that converted you? If you're not if you were never a lifelong Christian, either if you were never a lifelong Christian, what was it that converted you specifically? And if you are a lifelong Christian, what is it that continues to keep you convinced? Just tell me what you believe and why you believe it. And then if their response is, well, if I told you wouldn't, my reasons for believing wouldn't convince you, then I would go on to say, all right, well then why did they convince you? And then we get a whole discussion there. But at least it's a little bit more honest, I think. Generally
speaking, in spite of the proliferation of conversion stories, most people stay with the religion that they grew up in. Mm-hmm. Apologists have this problem, which is that sooner or later everybody runs into scientific reasoning, which has historically worked really, really well in terms of discovering things about the nature of the universe. And I think that apologetics has sort of bifurcated and gone two different directions in response to scientific credibility. One of them, which is basically scientific creationism, is an attempt to use the trappings of science, the sort of cargo cult science, like Richard Feynman described it, and dress up old school theology in a white lab coat and say, look, this is scientific. Isn't it amazing how the order of Genesis exactly matches what we now know about the way things came into existence in reality, which is total nonsense, by the way.
And that's going on a lot in Islam, too. You get a lot of arguments from
you do see a lot of that.
Islamic apologists who will claim that the Quran contains all of this advanced science that no one else knew at the time and wasn't discovered by the secular world until the 20th century or what have you.
Right.
And those usually crumble upon examination, but they're trying at the same time.
Yeah, but then they got this other faction, which has sort of observed the fact that, look, when we try to go toe-to-toe with science, on its own terms, we lose. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to undermine the very concept of logical thinking and scientific reasoning, or we're going to basically claim credit for the concept of logical thinking in the first place. And so, we are no longer henceforth going to discuss any reasons why it makes sense to believe in God. Instead of doing that, we're going to say, well, why should I have a reason?
And that's the psi approach.
That's what I think of presuppositional apologetics. And I think Daniel Dennett wrote about a similar approach in his book in the 90s, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, where he described like trying to dispose of reason as playing intellectual tennis without a net. And he said when something like that comes up, you should just say something like, well, that proves that your God is a ham sandwich wrapped in tinfoil. Because once reason is off the table, there's no basis for having a discussion with each other. And I think usually the presuppositional apologist will at some point circle back and try to claim that he owns reason, and he really wanted to have a rational discussion at all. But I mean, I would just say something like, well, if you think that there's no basis there's no other basis for having reason than a God, and I still reject God, we're kind of stuck and there's no conversation to have right now.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree, and it's frustrating to listen to morons like that when they get put in a corner, and then they use this, oh no, but God basically hardwired the idea of God inside your brain, and you're just suppressing it. And I actually find myself yelling at the screen like, you fucking moron.
Yeah, well, I actually think that is by design, because I think in addition to the arguments of presuppositional apologetics, I think the attitude is very much wrapped up in it, so that it's not an accident that Cy ten Bruggencate is kind of a smug asshole, because his whole modus operandi is to make people uncomfortable and annoyed with him.
Yeah, and then once the whole approach, I think, is just to get the atheist to rage quit the argument, and at that point he'll claim victory. But it's just argument by assertion. I mean, and it's a sort of classic begging the question fallacy, where the point that you're actually trying to prove, or the thing that you're actually trying to prove, is presented as your foundational premise. Right? So it's like, well, reason. If you can't even. Since God is responsible for reason, you can't even use reason. The fact that you're using reason at all is itself proof for God. It's just an assertion, and they don't feel that they have to support it. And then you just end up in this sort of rhetorical cul-de-sac with them. The more you try to get them to understand, no, you can't just assert things. This is what the whole process of argument is about. You make a statement, and then it must be supported rationally.
If you find yourself in an argument with a presuppositional apologist, I recommend using this phrase a lot. I reject your premise. And that's all you need to say, really, in a lot of cases, because if they're taking reason off the table, then they need to provide the terms of the discussion, and you can just respond to their childishness with your own by saying, nuh-uh.
Well, I you know what, you guys, thank you so much. I appreciate all that you do. I love your show. I watch you guys on YouTube all the time. And I hope you guys have a good New Year, and I look forward to your future shows. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for calling. We appreciate it.
All right, take care.
All right, bye. Chad in Chicago.
Chad.
Hello?
Hi, you're on.
All right. I'm glad I got you guys. You guys are a little more on the left, aren't you? Like left to center?
Are you going to try to have another libertarian conversation? Because I'm not in the mood for that today.
No, I won't mention libertarian. I just wanted to know for this next question. I was going to ask about separation of church and state. If let's say a church wanted to, let's say we want to express our religious views by performing same-sex marriages. It's part of our religion, and we want to perform gay marriages for people. And, if you don't let us, you're like, I don't know, like, would you support that? Or or just say no because it's the church?
What the church does in the case of marriage is not legally binding. The only thing that really matters in the end in terms of a marriage is whether you can get the state certificate and whether it confers legal benefits. So
yeah, I guess that's true.
As far as I'm concerned, a church can do the cliche thing and marry a man and a dog. I mean, I don't want to equate that with gay marriage because that's not what I mean at all. But I personally support gay marriage very much. But I don't care what churches do in the end.
Yeah, and I wouldn't see
as long
that
as they're not setting laws.
Yeah, and I wouldn't see that specifically as a church-state separation issue either. And as Russell said, if you get married in a church but there was no license and you didn't do any of the other things that you have to do to get your wedding legally recognized, then it's just a ceremony and it's no more of a legal marriage than.
Okay, that's really true. But in this hypothetical situation, let's assume that nobody's pushing for gay marriage, that we're not talking about it, and out of left field or right field rather, the church starts campaigning for gay marriage. They say we want the right to perform this, and they were the only ones making noise about it, and nobody else really cared. Like, how would we? I mean, would we say no? That's your religious views, and keep that out of our laws, or would we say that's a good idea?
I mean, what do you mean by campaigning for it? Because I'm okay with churches expressing an opinion.
Yeah, and if it's a thing that they want to do in their church with their members, they can do that, right? Just like they can have christenings and baptisms and what have you.
An easier example would maybe be if they were not gay marriage, but for something else. Like if the church was pushing for something that we didn't necessarily hate, but somebody could view it and say, yeah, that is kind of mixing their religion with our laws, I guess. Like, I can't think of a good analogy.
It would be more of a situation, I think a situation like you're trying to ask us about. Right. Maybe a scenario would be if churches insisted that all marriages, all legal marriages had to be carried out. If, for example, if they tried to get the government to perhaps support legislation where, all marriages must take place in some kind of house of worship to be legally recognized. Then I think, in other words, you couldn't go to a justice of the peace, or you just couldn't have your buddy who's got some, ministers or whatever certificate that you have to get.
And when you get married in the church, they can set some rules like you have to sign this document of faith and so forth.
If they were trying to do something like that, then you would be looking at maybe a definite church-state separation issue. You would be looking at a religious discrimination issue. It would take something like that. But, I think, though, that our Constitution would prohibit that kind of thing. You would not, hopefully, with the way that the country is swinging, I would hope that we would not see, we'd be in a really, pretty pile of shit if we ended up having this country, the churches in this country were allowed to dictate how all marriages, even to their non-members, even to people who did not practice that particular religion or faith tradition, were still able to dictate to everyone what a legal marriage should be. Fortunately, so that would be a problem. But fortunately, that's not what we have. And so maybe we should diligently watch against that, because certainly
we certainly should.
Yeah, because again, all of the objections and all of the states that still have same-sex marriage illegal, the opposition to all of this has been, has been religious. There is frankly no valid, rational, secular argument against same-sex marriage that I've ever heard.
I know a couple.
Well, I can't imagine that there, maybe there are
all the secular arguments I've heard for gay marriage could equally be applied to, against gay marriage, could equally well be applied to straight marriage.
Yeah, at least
not for children.
Yeah, but I'm talking about valid arguments against. The argument that gay couples can't raise children is false.
Well, we don't really know. Like, there's never been any study, and it's kind of an
There actually have been studies, and they've shown no evidence whatsoever that two gay parents are any worse than raising kids than straight parents.
I've seen studies on both sides of this issue, and people on the other side say, "Oh, that study is BS." That's like total snowball study. And there's ones on both sides. And there is one that says that it is harmful, and there's other ones that say it's not harmful. So
you know, there are actually standards for saying studies are BS.
And I love it. And if people already have an ideological opposition to an idea, then of course any study that comes out that supports the idea, or if people have an ideological preference to favor an idea, and there's some study that says no, the idea is bad, naturally they're going to say, well, that's BS or that's BS. So,
but he would highly disagree with you. The scientist who did that study, he would say, absolutely not. Like,
Who?
how dare you?
But the scientists would then have, he would have to show actual data that made his case, and then that data would have to be sort of independently confirmed. You know,
right.
And meanwhile, every same-sex couple that I know of who has children, they have very lovely, happy children. So
I mean, obviously that can happen, and that's probably true in most cases.
Yeah.
But I feel like we don't know for sure, and it's like we should. Like I wish.
Well, then, if we don't know for sure, then why don't we, by default, allow people to do what they want instead of arbitrarily outlawing something? I mean, we don't know that any particular straight couple is good at raising kids. Some of them are terrible at it. Maybe you could profile particular straight couples and determine, oh, we've decided you guys are unfit to have kids. But the bottom line is, in general, we tend to err on the side of more freedom.
Right, and I agree too. I feel the same way, but I just feel like one distinction I wanted to note was there isn't anything a gay American is receiving right now, or there's nothing that I'm receiving that he's not. He's not being denied anything that I'm getting. You know?
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, 100% sure. Like he can't get married to a man, but neither can I. You know, it's not like I can, but he can.
Whoop-de-doo.
Yeah, I mean, what's that got to do with the price of tea and
because it just doesn't make sense when people say like, oh, like it's like you're outlining, because we make the rule, not the exception to the rule. So we don't
right.
say
So suppose we passed a law, we call it the Freedom of Voting Act, that says from now on nobody is ever allowed to vote for a libertarian. But it's equal because I'm not allowed to vote for a libertarian and neither are you. Are you cool with that?
Yeah, but it doesn't say in the law that the libertarian can't vote, and it doesn't say that a gay person can't get married.
That's essentially what you're saying right now.
Yeah. The law says that this is marriage. It is a union between a man and a woman. That's what marriage is, and anybody can do this. This isn't restricted from anyone. Every man or woman in America.
Yeah, but the point is, what you're talking about, you're attempting to come up with a weak justification for a specific law that, when you take all the different kind of demographic groups in America. One particular group is adversely affected by that law, but you're trying to claim that it's a fair law because even though this one group is affected by it, all the others aren't inconvenienced. Or the fact that groups 1 through 10 aren't inconvenienced by particular legal restriction, but group 11 isn't, is something you're treating as an irrelevance. Because the claim is, but look, it's at least fair, right? I mean, it's fairly applied to everybody, and if the fact that it only presents a real restriction to one out of the many groups, compared to the fairness of it applying to everyone, that's a minor concern. But it's not a minor concern because you basically have it's discrimination. I mean, that's textbook discrimination.
No, I guess.
So
I'd be willing to convince otherwise, but I think that it would be discrimination if they said everybody can get married except for you're a homosexual. Like that would be discrimination. Like.
Yeah, well, when you tell people,
were you okay with laws against interracial marriage like 60 years ago?
No, that's a lateral move we don't have to make. That's totally different. Races. And
it's not totally different.
It's not different because all of the arguments back then.
You could apply the exact same argument, and people did. You could say, look, I'm not allowed to marry a person outside my race, and neither is that guy over there, so it's totally fair. That is not fairness. People should be allowed to marry who they want.
I'm going to think about that analogy and kind of break it down, because I'm not sure I agree with it, but it might be analogous. I'm not sure. I think there might be a difference, but I think if they told if they told everybody that everybody can get married except for you, that is discrimination. There has to be a way to distinct.
Yeah, you can get married as long as you marry the kind of person we say you can marry.
Well, like I said, it's like here's marriage. Anybody can do it. Nobody is restricted from this. Any man, woman, and American can take part in this union.
All right.
And it's like,
And
I'm
which
not
is
receiving-
openly discriminatory against, people who aren't heterosexual, right?
Right.
I mean,
and I actually, like, I'm more of a libertarian, and I know you didn't want to hear that word.
Surprise.
but-
yeah, we gathered that. It's more
Did
like
I,
this.
did I not guess that in the first 10 seconds of this call?
Yeah. So you could take any particular group with any particular focus and apply a law that has the pretense of fairness, but if this one group is the one that is more inconvenienced by the law, whereas all the other groups, well, this wasn't even something that would have entered into my sphere of influence, into my life experience in any way. So it's a law that doesn't even bother me. But this one particular group are specifically in a very major way, right? Then yes, that is discrimination. So, the pretense of fairness by saying, well, the discriminatory law still applies to the people who are in no way discriminated by the application of it, isn't really fairness.
Okay.
That's not fairness.
But do you just oppose specifically the religious opposition to gay marriage? That's what you oppose.
Well, but I think that because there are more religious opposition, religious-based, faith-based arguments against gay marriage, but as I said, so that might be a factor there. I mean, when the arguments are, well, God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and that of course that's all rubbish, right? But like I said, I have not seen any compelling argument, religious or secular, against why two consenting adults who happen to be of the same gender could not legally wed and spend their lives together. I've heard no good argument about it.
Yeah, if we could put the religious issues aside, then what? Then what do we do?
Mm-hmm.
Then you'd be left with no case against gay marriage.
Yeah, like I said,
Well,
I haven't heard a good secular argument against the practice either. So.
Well, I mean, a lot of people think that, but if you take the religious issue aside, there are secular reasons for supporting gay marriage. And I think that atheism kind of necessarily hurts our image as atheists when you associate with groups like gay rights and gay marriage and stuff. It
That's
makes sense
disgusting.
How
lost.
unless you're a bigoted asshole, it would not. No. It does not hurt atheism to be against discrimination and bigotry. And only a bigot would say that. So
Right.
bye.
Also, I'd like your opinion on whether we take this guy or not. Line 2, Darren in Massachusetts.
Hi.
Hello, Darren, you're on.
Hey. How's it going, Russell? How's it going, Martin?
Pretty good.
Going well.
Great to be on. So recently I had a discussion with my father, and first it started out as a political discussion. Something having to do, it usually starts out with I'm black, so it usually starts out with a racial discussion. Mm-hmm. And then, so it starts out, how he says, oh, well, yeah, the white people are taking away our civil liberties and all that. And then it goes into a religious reference by saying they're doing a misrepresentation of Christianity. Mm-hmm. And then it's just okay, well, I'll let that one slide for a little bit, because I'm atheist. And so then he'll keep going on and then, say something else, and then he'll go even more further back into the past of slavery. Mm-hmm. And then he'll start talking more about race. And then then I end up
let me get this straight. You're a white guy and your friend is a person of color? Or
no, I'm black.
You're black.
Yeah,
okay.
you said, yeah.
Sorry.
I'm talking about my father.
Okay.
Okay.
So
got it.
Okay. So what's the conflict that you're specifically that you want to ask us about?
Well, when it gets into slavery, that's when I basically say to my father, well, here you are talking about slavery, and you're, the God that you worship, him being a Christian, mm-hmm. the God that you worship is an endorser of slavery. Mm-hmm. So then I show him Exodus 21, but here's the argument that I don't think has ever been on the Atheist Experience. I've watched your show for years. Usually he'll point to that, and I showed him Exodus 21, and he says that's what that's the wickedness of man. That's not the wickedness of God. God created man.
Wait, so stuff in the
You know.
Bible is just man-made? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think it's pretty clear that these are, all of these laws having to do with how you treat your slave. All this comes pretty much. There's very little in the Old Testament that didn't come directly out of the Big G's mouth, right? These were his laws. This is what you do. These are the rules. Follow it.
Right.
So yeah, if he's saying no, that's just the wickedness of man, I think he's specifically just ignoring, the meta text, not subtext of the.
I mean, in
that
reality,
scripture.
of course, it is
Right.
all the wickedness of man.
Well,
the
sure,
whole Bible
yeah.
is.
Yeah, sure. But you can't take like specific edicts from the Lord that are presented in the Old Testament and say, oh, that's not the Lord saying that when He is. So,
Right.
I think that
well,
is.
see, the thing,
Well, I'm sorry. I was just going to say
sorry.
what you're pointing to is. This is something that is continually whittling away, I think, at Christian belief as any sort of any kind of valid claims that can be made that there is a source of morality here that is of benefit to humanity. Because every time that you point to some kind of something in the Bible that's clearly morally reprehensible, clearly inhumane, you hear these kinds of excuses. And what you're seeing is, this is all the kind of post-Enlightenment secular humanistic thinking that modern Christians understand. They have to shoehorn this, and they have to kind of recontextualize the Bible now to make some. No. That we were always this. It was never about discrimination. It was never about really supporting this sort of thing. You hear a lot of tortuous arguments about how no, this wasn't really slavery. It was just sort of like a kind of indentured servitude, and you could still and it was still about. They try to make it more humane. And it's because, again, I think they really do understand deep down inside, no, you can't just plop this book on the table, this Holy Bible down and say, this is the infallible moral authority to follow. This gets everything right, because it clearly does not. And so the fact that they kind of have to do all of this is a bit of maybe just an acknowledgement of the moral inferiority of their scripture. And they can't come right out and just say that. They have to structure it a little differently. So that's what you're encountering, I think.
Right, but see, I then later I then kind of just confirmed and said, all right, well, I'll give you that. But even if it doesn't say specifically the Lord is endorsing it, or it's not referencing the Lord at all. I mean, it doesn't make any of the other atrocities he's committed in the Bible him less credible to be worth. I mean, or to be worship worthy. Because but then it then ate away at me, and then I started searching for more and more Bible verses that could possibly link it, so that basically I could show it to him another time if he ends up bringing it up again. And I did. I found Deuteronomy 20:10-14, which basically Deuteronomy is the law of the Lord, and how it explains that the Lord spoke through Moses to tell him to go into a town, make a peace offering, and if they take the peace offering, enslave them. Basically, that shows that God is endorsing slavery. So if Exodus 21 didn't work, then if they're looking for an actual reference to the Lord, then just show them Deuteronomy 20:10-14.
If you want a really solid argument for the biblical view of slavery, there's an essay that I always like to toss around. This is by a fellow named Thornton Stringfellow, writing in 1856. It's an essay called Scriptural and Statistical Views in Favor of Slavery. Now, this was a reverend in 1856 who, this is pre-Civil War, and he was an anti-abolitionist who was arguing against the freeing of the slaves. And he lays out this very, very scriptural case with lots of Bible verses in great detail, saying, you see, God told Abraham to take these slaves, and he lists all the Bible verses. So I would recommend checking that out, because that's one of my favorite examples.
What a difference 150 years makes, right?
Right.
Yeah.
What is that called again?
Scriptural and Statistical Views in Favor of Slavery.
Scriptural, I'm sorry, you got to say that one more time.
Scriptural and Statistical Views in Favor of Slavery.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I don't know if this is the final case. If this is like a knockdown case, because, if your dad can argue that even the Bible is the work of sinful man, certainly he's not going to take this guy seriously. But he may have some other verses that you can use.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just like arguing with my is also kind of a different type of thing, because he, like when I'm talking and I don't necessarily get what I'm saying across fully, and so then I have to hear him rant for another 5 minutes, and then I have to talk for another 2.
Right.
So it kind of ends up happening like that. And and then there was like something he showed me that had to do with pseudoscience, and obviously what Russell said, it's basically intellectual bullshit, mixed into one. The main thing is if he's going to be reading off all these things to me, saying that there's a design in the genetic, then well, first of all, there has to be a Nobel Peace Prize to be had, for the person who discovered it. Science is about discovery, not something that you already know. But then later I saw down this document that he gave me to read that it says, learn how to refute atheism. And then I told him, and it's like, do you see that right there? And I said, you can't refute atheism. He's like, you want to make a bet? Interrupted me again. And I said, well, it's a position. It's not an idea. You don't refute a position. Position is just, you simply believe in no God.
Yeah.
It's not, we don't assume,
Right.
But then he assumes that our standpoint is that we assert that God doesn't exist. And I said, there's all different kinds of atheists. I didn't assert during any religious discussion at all that God doesn't exist. I don't know, Nor do I
Or
pretend
you
like
don't
I do.
believe because it has not been proved to you, and that's all
Right.
you. And that's really all. That's all you need. That atheism is a response to theistic claims, at its
Right.
core. At its core, it can. A person who is an atheist can, above and beyond that, have ideas about the concept of God, about other concepts, about other philosophical ideas, and these can be informed by their atheism.
Right.
So that is true. But if you want to
Right.
if you just want to get to the nitty-gritty, atheism itself, just a response to theistic claims. And so if someone says, I make this claim, and you say, I don't believe you, and they say, why not? And they say, because I do not believe you have proven your case, et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing there that I'm saying that they can refute. The only way they can refute what I am saying is to meet that burden of proof that I told them that they have not met.
Right.
That's as far as it needs to go. I am not asserting a positive claim myself. I could. Now, if I were to go on and say, well, nothing that could ever possibly be called a God could possibly exist, then now I've put myself in a position where I have made a positive claim for which I bear the burden. But it's not necessary to do that, to take the atheist position and to be able to defend it rationally.
Right. And and then when it went on from there, there was something else that he said. Basically, if I were to tell him to prove something to me, because he actually made an assertion. He made the assertion that, God created us because, then he got into the pseudoscience talk, but then, he made the assertion that God created us. And I said, okay, well, can you demonstrate that God created us? And then he said, and then he points to the Bible and then reads Adam and Eve, Genesis 1-3, like Adam and Eve, and I'm like, okay, first of all, that's the same thing you just asserted. I'm not looking for an assertion on top of an assertion. I'm looking for actual evidence, so then it just becomes a circular argument.
Yeah, the Bible is not, the Bible isn't the evidence for the claim. The Bible is the claim.
Right.
Yeah, and the evidence is something else.
Right. I mean, your dad is reading the Bible with the assumption that being in the Bible somehow makes it authoritative, and I would just say that, like, you quoting the Bible on that has no more impact than me quoting Star Trek.
Right.
Yes, the Star Trek rule.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
and that's where. So this is where a lot of arguments between Christians and atheists just end up. You talk past each other because you're coming from different premises, and it can often be baffling to the Christian when they're like, oh wait, because they're taking these as foundational truths and as
Right,
premises
and
that are self-evident.
That may be
and
the
they're not.
conversation that you need to get to
Yeah.
and change the subject off of slavery and say, I'm sorry, but I do not accept the Bible as authoritative. I don't see that it
Right.
has any
Not-
particular more insights than any other book.
I just don't accept it as this a priori, bundle of truth that's not to be questioned. And
Yeah,
so
and not to mention all the other things like the rape condoning as well. I mean, the Deuteronomy verse condones slavery along with rape, along with
Right.
murder.
36,000
So,
Midianite
all-
women.
Yeah, and I mean, there
package.
are different ways you can go when discussing the Bible. The problem with picking this or that example from the Bible is that we've talked about slavery and we've talked about rape, but Christians are really good at tying themselves in knots over this idea that anything the Bible says is automatically correct, and so if the Bible seems to be justifying slavery, then we just must not understand the context. That's a popular word.
Yeah.
Right.
And so they'll make up all kinds of justifications, just like a Star Trek fan who discovers an inconsistency between two episodes. Would similarly, make up all sorts of, invent all sorts of wacky explanations that why, tachyons can really do that or whatever.
Yeah.
So, which is why some of the time when I discuss the Bible, I prefer to jump outside the entire system and not talk about what's in the Bible, but just say, I have no particular reason to accept the Bible as true in general.
So you start them
Right.
there, so it's like that's the square one you start from, and then you can
Right.
get on with like actual content, actual moral edicts that the Bible makes, things like that. But you got to kind of start from
Yeah.
there first, and then. But
then,
anyway,
But being African American, it has this like sort of effect on me where it's like he talks about how slavery is bad and everything, and then it's just like our people went through the same thing is what the Bible is basically saying, and it's like I don't know how the hell you can still read it, and it's like that's why it bothers me because it's what I actually care for,
Right.
but at the same time it's just
yeah, and it just seems it's one rule for the chosen people, and for you have the Bible start. There's the whole story of the Hebrews being held in bondage for all these centuries in Egypt and what have you, but then. Once they're back home, it's like here are all the rules under which you can own another human being.
right.
Anyway,
Okay. Well,
But,
good luck with those discussions.
yeah,
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. Everything you gave me was pretty helpful.
definitely, we appreciate it. Thanks for the call.
Yep, no problem.
All right, bye. All right, thumbs up, thumbs down. On. Okay. This call is on you, Martin.
Oh, well, it's
Drew in Wisconsin.
Drew.
Hi, guys.
Hi, you're on the air.
Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I just wanted to talk about how I think the feminist movement and the atheist movements should be separated because I see them getting combined more and more. And I see some problems with this where basically you're excluding a lot of people who don't fall under both. And that's going to weaken both movements because there's going to be
Before
religious...
you go on, let me ask you, a few callers ago, we had a guy who was saying that it hurts the atheist movement to support gay marriage. How do you feel about that? Just want to know where you're coming from.
I disagree with that.
So you do
It's
think that
different.
You think
do
that
think that atheists should have common cause with people supporting gay marriage?
Yes.
Okay.
So you don't think atheism should be separated from everything, just feminism specifically?
I do think that, the way I see it right now is the feminist movement and the atheist movement are actually being combined a lot, where
Can you define feminism for
gay
me?
rights.
No,
Yeah,
no,
when I see gay rights and atheists and the atheist movement, it's more of an alliance instead of being completely intertwined.
Okay.
Well, but what I don't really see what's the distinction there? If supporters, if people who are atheists are also supportive of equality for the LGBT community, how is that different than being supportive of equality for, say, women or different races, for example, minority races, anything like that, if it's down to the notion of groups of people should not be discriminated against because of whatever it is about themselves, their race, their gender.
Right. Superficial physical factors.
Their sexual preference. And if we can also point to the fact that the people who generally favor discrimination against these groups, as we talked about in the earlier call today, most of the arguments against same-sex marriage are religious. They're rooted in biblical belief. They're rooted in this idea that the Bible is some sort of moral authority and that God considers homosexuality an abomination. So there you have, for example, a specific set of moral precepts that the opponents of this kind of equality are using that are rooted in religion. Then, even though atheism itself on its own is simply the rejection of theistic claims, wouldn't it be a natural offshoot to say, okay, well then, if we are opposed to these religious beliefs, then the moral precepts these religious beliefs are trying to impose upon society that are unfair to other groups of people are also things we should oppose. I mean, wouldn't you consider that to be kind of a natural adjunct?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. So I kind of want to move on here because I think we have a bit.
Well, I just want to understand why you don't have a problem, for example, with atheism allying with one particular equality movement, but you do with this other one. And
I'm going to get to that. Basically, we're having an issue with the definition of terms here.
Okay,
which is
go ahead.
The definition of feminism.
Give your definition.
Yeah.
Where I'm talking more about the feminist ideology of radical modern feminism.
Which is what?
Male patriarchy, male privilege, rape culture.
You mean the idea that male patriarchy exists?
And that's the radical feminist idea.
Do you think that's a radical idea?
That's radical.
You don't think that we live in a male-dominated society?
Well, if patriarchy, from the definition, is a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it.
Okay, how many have you got a good idea what proportion of congressmen or congresspeople are women?
It's around 20%, but the problem with that
have you got an idea how many Fortune 500 CEOs are women?
You equated women with feminism, which is a faulty equation.
Well, no, feminism is
you just said it was a radical idea that, that society tends to be male-dominated, and I'm just trying to explore that. Why is that radical? Is it false?
Yeah, I mean, are you denying that there are more men in position of power and influence in our culture and in our society than women? Are you denying that is actually the case?
Okay, again, no, I'm not.
It's a yes or no question. Are you denying that there are more men in position of power and influence and governance in our society than women?
With governance, there are about 20% are women.
However, that would be less than the 80% that are men, right?
Yes.
Can I explain my position, which is where a woman can be anti-woman and a man can be pro-woman. So that statistic alone does not explain the full power. For instance, Dr.
So we want to rely on all these male senators to appropriately represent their constituencies. How are they doing at that, by the way?
Well, okay, for instance, take Dr. Warren Farrell, who wrote the book of The Myth of Male Power. He was a feminist for a long time. Same
as a whole bunch of apologists come at us and say, I used to be an atheist like you.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean...
I do not for a second buy that Warren Farrell was a feminist by any recognizable definition of the word.
And again, I don't...
to a feminist council.
I don't, and like I said, I didn't ask about it. I don't really care about him. I want to get back to the original question. Are you denying that in our culture and in our society today, there are more men in positions of power, influence, and governance than women. Just in terms of numbers.
There's a couple things here.
It's a yes or no question. Do you deny?
Positions of power do not include just governance. The media, it has a lot to do with governance.
Don't care. I'm not asking you.
That the media, do you think that influential media people are by and large more male or female?
I would say they're more for women's rights than men's rights.
I didn't ask you what the position was. Are men specifically, like human beings, male human beings versus female human beings, are there more men in position of power, influence, and or governance in our society than women, just as a sheer matter of numbers? Yes or no?
As a sheer, on the governance, like I said, it's about 20%.
Stop
female,
trying to nitpick the question. It is yes or no.
You keep interrupting me. I'm trying to answer your question.
No, you're doing this Mexican hat dance
very
around.
hard not to answer the question is the point here.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get in the full answer without getting cut off, which is 80% of government positions are male.
Okay, so then the answer
in the media, I don't know what the percentages are, but I'd be willing to guess it's a lot closer to 50-50.
You're willing to guess. Yeah, well, we could guess that there are manatees in position of Fortune 500 company CEO positions. Guessing doesn't really matter here. Okay.
Right. I mean, basically, you are accusing people of being radical for something which, as far as I can tell, is accurate, and I don't mind being a radical for the truth.
Yeah.
No, I disagree again. The patriarchy, it's not just about numbers. You're conflating the tier numbers with power, and
but
if you want to do that, how many people are men in society, and how many people are women in society? There are a lot more women in society than men.
And yet there are more men in positions of power and influence and governance in society than women, despite the fact that demographically, in terms of the population, it's fairly evenly split. And this is now where the concept of inequality comes from, is it not?
I feel like you have a double standard here because you don't actually have the numbers on that. Like you just claimed, I don't have the numbers on the media coverage. And power is not something easily definable. If you define power as people who vote, because voting has a lot to do with who gets voted in to the positions of power in government, 54% of the voter turnout is female.
Yeah, but you specifically cited, though, as a radical claim and as one that you rejected, this notion that we live in a society in which there are more men running the show than women. Right?
Well, a patriarchy.
Since you just accused us of having no more information than you do, I just did a quick Google search. The Guardian tells me that a study recently discovered that 74% of news journalists are men. So I guess we have the answer to that question now.
So we're looking in terms of the numbers.
Is 54% female, and that they decide who gets elected to govern.
What the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, we just missed that. What did you just say?
Voter turnout is around 54% female and 46% male because there are more women than men, and women vote at a higher rate, 66% to 61%.
Fair enough, but that doesn't change, the figures that we have just.
The fact that people in actual positions of power are by and large men. When we talked about government, you didn't want to talk about government. You wanted to change the subject to journalism. So, okay, I have looked up the numbers for journalism, and there again, if that's a position of power, most of them are men.
Yeah.
Well, we're not talking about women. We're talking about feminism, which is what I was trying to.
No, we are talking about your claim that the notion that there exists male patriarchy or male privilege is a radical claim. And I think so far we've been demonstrating that this is in fact true.
Yeah.
So if your problem is radical feminism, and if your definition of radical feminism is people who are saying things that are accurate, then...
Okay, let's go back to the definition of patriarchy that I gave, which was a system of society or government in which men hold the power, and this is the key part, and women are largely excluded from it. Now, when women are voting at 54%, I don't agree that...
They're voting, but again, are they in power? Are they in power? And remember, and when did women actually get the vote? Russell, because they haven't had it for the same amount of time that
it seems like
that men have.
White male landowners have always had the vote back to the founding of this country, and women only got the vote in, what was it, the 20s?
The early, in the 19th
and
century.
back when suffragettes were fighting for the right of women to vote, guys like you were yelling tooth and nail that they should not have that right.
Not a male vote. The male represented the family, not the individual.
But the point is, we've just now given several examples where the numbers show that yes, in fact, men are dominating not only governance, but most major industries, fields, professions, or at least the ones that we've been able to find examples for. And so the definition of patriarchy that you are giving to us doesn't appear to be radical. It appears to simply be accurate. The numbers back it up. There are more men in position of power.
By my definition, there was a part of women are largely excluded.
So yeah, because if they're not getting these positions, if they're not getting these positions, that is exclusionary, is it not?
If you look at the rates, women are growing in these positions at a much higher rate.
Well, I should hope so,
when there's
they're way behind to start with.
Yeah, I mean, when there's nowhere to go but up, you can't help but grow, but it's still very slow, right? Let me give you my industry. I work in film and television. On an average, in a given year, major studio motion pictures, 16% are directed by women. Okay, so
I work at a major software company. In my office, there are something like 30, 40 men and like 2 or 3 women.
Yeah.
Again, this is women and men. This is not dealing with necessarily feminism.
Yeah, here's what it comes down to. Ultimately, you don't care about the relative positions of women and men. And I do, which is why I'm a feminist. And we're running out of time.
Yeah. See, I told you that would be a fun call.
That was kind of a fun call. And you know what's going to be more fun? All the hate mail we get after this show. Hello, MRAs. TV at atheist-community.org.
Here was my question. Here was him.
There is no show next week. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Thank you.
We'll see you at El Arroyo in half an hour. Martin, thanks for showing up.
Definitely, it was fun. Glad I did it. Yep. Happy New Year. Everybody be safe. And stuff.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, God.